Before we begin the installation of SQL Server 2014 Express, it's important to make sure that your system is up to date with all of the latest security patches and updates from Microsoft. It's likely that your computer is configured to automatically install these updates, but you can run through Windows Update just to make sure. If you're on Windows 8 or 8.1 as I am, or Windows 10, then you'll also need to enable the .NET 3.5 framework. Windows 8 comes with .NET 4, but SQL Server actually requires the older version to run, so we'll have to go get it set up ahead of time. To do that, I'll come down to my Start button, I'll right-click on it, and open up the Control Panel. From here, I'll go into Programs, then I'll go to Turn Windows Features On or Off. Then I want to make sure that there's a checkbox in this .NET Framework 3.5, and we'll press OK. If yours was turned off, then Windows at this point will download the necessary files and install them. Then it might actually reboot your computer too to finalize the process. Now, if you happen to be running Windows Server 2012 as your operating system, then the process of installing .NET 3.5 is a little bit different. But rather than go through that process, I'm just going to refer you to Martin Guidry's course here on lynda.com called SQL Server 2014 Essential Training. And specifically, in Chapter 2, there's a movie called Installation Prerequisites. Martin does a good job of outlining the steps that apply specifically to Windows Server 2012, so go check out that if it applies to your situation. Once we're sure that .NET 3.5 is installed on our computer, we're ready to start the installation of SQL Server. I'm going to come out to my Downloads folder here and double-click on the executable file that downloaded. I'll go ahead and accept the user account control permissions here, and that'll extract the files to my system. I'll go ahead and press OK to accept the default location here, which is going to go back into my Downloads folder. Once it's finished, the SQL Server Installation Center window should open up. Now, if it doesn't open automatically, we can go ahead and find it here by going into the folder that was just extracted and double-clicking on Setup here. We'll go ahead and say yes to this permission setting, and that'll once again return us back here to the SQL Server Installation Center window. Let's go ahead and just move it here to the middle of my screen. At this point, I want to create a new SQL Server installation on my computer. I'll choose this top option here, and that'll start up the setup options. We can go through the license terms. Let's go ahead and accept these licenses here. Go ahead and select that checkbox and say Next. Then it'll go through some system checks to make sure that we're ready to go. So it looks like my computer is all set up and ready to go because it moved me to the next step. But if you get any warning dialogues or anything that shows up that needs to be addressed, you'll have to address that before you can move on to this next step here. Then we get to choose which features of SQL Server we want installed. I'm just going to go ahead and leave all the defaults here and press Next. On the instance configuration screen, we get to name the instance that SQL Server is going to use. We can install multiple separate instances of SQL Server at the same time on the same computer, so we can go ahead and give them unique names here. Instead of SQL Express, I'm going to call it SQL Express 2014, so I can remember which version this is. Let's go ahead and change that there and press Next. I'll go ahead and accept the default server configuration as well, so once again, I'll press Next here. On the Database Engine configuration screen, we get to specify how we want users to log into SQL Server. The options here are Windows Authentication Mode, which will use your Windows login user account, or we could specify Mixed Mode, which will allow us to set separate passwords for individual users as well. Let's go ahead and choose Mixed Mode here, and I'm going to type in a password for the System Administrator or the SA account. And I'm just going to type in Lynda. I also want to make sure that my current user that's logged into this machine, which is me, is selected down here so that I have two different ways that I can enter my SQL Server. Once those changes have been made, I'll go ahead and say Next. After that, the installation process begins. Now, it's going to take about 20 minutes to run through this process depending on your system configuration, so go ahead and go grab a cup of coffee, and I'll meet you back here in just a moment. And it looks like it's finished now. I can go ahead and scroll through this list here to see that we have lots of green check marks and everything was successful. Now, before we leave, I want to point out this link here. If you click on it, it'll take you out to the Books Online for SQL Server 2014. This is the online documentation for SQL Server, and I highly recommend that you bookmark this because it contains a wealth of information that you might want to review later on. Let's go ahead and close this down. And we'll come back in here, and when I'm finished, I'll just press Close, and the installation is complete. So those are the steps that you need to go through in order to install your very own instance of SQL Server Express. The only tricky bit is to make sure that you have the .NET 3.5 framework installed first, but once that detail is taken care of, the installation usually proceeds without any issue. If you do run into trouble though, consult the log files for hints on what might have gone wrong.